What are some challenges in today's winemaking that have big consequences in the future? Welcome to the first episode of the second season of Winemaking Experiences by Enartis, the podcast dedicated to the world of winemaking. Today we talk with Giulio Somma, editor of Il Corriere Vinicolo, the periodical of Unione Italiana Vini, the Association of Italian Wine Businesses. We will cover sustainability in wine production and delve into why it is not just an environmental matter, but also a strategic approach to ensure continuity and long-term success. Join us and let's explore how wineries can turn sustainability into a tangible opportunity to improve efficiency.
Please be aware that the following audio has been translated from Italian to English using AI.
Hello everyone, technicians and wine enthusiasts, welcome to our podcast, Winemaking Experiences by Enartis. My name is Lorenza Secchi, Marketing Manager for Enartis, and today I have the pleasure of being in the company of Giulio Somma. Welcome, Giulio.
Thank you, Lorenza, and greetings to everyone.
Giulio Somma is the editor of Corriere Vinicolo, which is the main information organ of the Unione Italiana Vini, as well as clearly representing a central figure in what is publishing in the Italian wine industry and beyond. Giulio is a communications and marketing expert with more than 30 years of experience, so we are delighted to have him with us today to talk about a very hot and very current issue, which is that of sustainability. The word sustainability is a word that really embraces numerous meanings nowadays. We could even say that numerous interpretations have been attributed to it. Today, we can say that sustainability is crucial for the sector, offering winery producers an opportunity. Its significance cannot be overlooked, as it is absolutely essential. At the same time, however, it is a somewhat overused word, a word that, as I mentioned earlier, has taken on several meanings. Therefore, I would like to ask you, Giulio, first of all, what is sustainability for you? And especially, how do you see it within what is the system of today of the wine supply chain, depending also on the climate change that we have been experiencing for several years now?
The wine supply chain has been a shining example of sustainability in the agricultural sector for several years now. In the agricultural sector, there are monitoring activities and awards related to sustainability, and winemakers have consistently been among the best. What accounts for this? Sustainability is becoming a regulatory issue, which we will talk about in a moment. But sustainability in the wine industry is a matter that, unlike in other non-agricultural but generally productive sectors, is touched upon. Why, you ask? Because sustainable choices lead to quick economic results when they are successfully completed. Simply put, the waste that becomes primary and secondary raw material, you save on disposal and you save on purchase. The photovoltaic system that lowers your electricity bill, the water savings that lower your water bill, these are choices that lead to visible results. But above all, the wine producer knows he works with the land, because vineyards trivially plant themselves on the ground. Therefore, every decision that awareness might affect, weaken, or damage in some way, that extraordinary heritage that is nature, which is the environment where the vineyard lives, it is clear that the winemaker, as an environmental sentinel, is the first to spot danger before others. Thus, it is the one that equips itself to handle the threat, particularly in this situation. He equips himself to put in place those practices that lower the environmental impact. Better if they reduce it or nullify it, because there is an understanding that these choices will help the vineyard to survive and survive our generations as well. The farming world is one that has always had a great sense of family, of traditions, and of the passing of time, but of the passing of time that gives us an important past. How many times does the word tradition come back in wine and quality agribusiness? Because the greatness of our products comes from the past. But this past, we must also interpret it as a future to leave to our generations and to the future of our products. Sustainability awareness in wine starts here. Noting that the word sustainable, contrary to what is often believed, is not the sustainable word from English sustain, meaning the ability to last. So much so that in French it translates to durable, meaning durability, which is a word that is starting to become common. Sustainable choices aren't just those that leave no mark on the environment, they are the ones that last through time. These are choices that last and should not harm the environment, because if the environment reacts poorly, durability will be compromised. Thus, this understanding of how significant the past is And the importance of building the future, which the wine world has in its cultural DNA, is the foundation of sensitivity towards sustainability.
Thank you, Giulio, for this overview that you have given us already quite in depth on what this issue is. I want to bring some data to the table as well. We know that 75% of Italian wineries believe strongly in the possibility of investing in what is sustainability. The truth of the matter is that as of now, only 30% of organizations have a sustainability plan in place or are actively engaged in developing a sustainability report. Thus, what I find myself pondering is primarily what your opinion is regarding this data, should you wish to share your thoughts with me. And especially if this cannot help us see the choice of sustainability as either a necessity or a chance. Therefore, the winery and the producer begin to see this as a duty, an obligation towards the consumer, or alternatively, they view it as a competitive advantage.
These percentages you gave do not surprise me. Why don't they surprise me? Because sustainability beyond, as you said earlier, that has unfortunately become an overused word as it encompasses a commitment to the future. It should not be trivialized, and we risk the trivialization of a word leading to indifference, and thus also leads to a decline in attention to these issues, so that is one of the big risks. But sustainability has undoubtedly become, within even the wine world, a reputational rating. We think that today many industry guides, many wine critics, even non-Italian ones, I give just two examples, Jensis Robinson in England, Luciano Ferraro with the Corriere della Serena guide in Italy, Daniele Kernigli himself, under the mentorship of Dr. Wine, they set sustainability rules in the evaluation not of wines, because they must maintain their own in the assessment of wine critics, but in the presentation of companies. It is clear that being presented as a sustainable company in these guides raises your reputation. It also raises the proximity to these themes, and the consumer perceives these things. Therefore, this work with a specialized industry print and with guides that are increasingly giving space to these topics has clearly raised awareness of the sector. So 75% is being considered overall, from the wine company to the large industrial winery. Moreover, even the 30%, which I still consider to be a very high percentage, is a figure that also does not surprise me. Why? Because on the one hand, it is still high, because it means that an increasing number of enterprises. Let's keep in mind that we have been talking about sustainability for 4 years now. That is, it is an issue that broke out 4 years ago, 5 years ago. Before, it was never talked about. In 5 years, 30% of companies in such a rich and important industry endowing and organizing themselves with concrete practices is a crazy achievement, in my opinion, for the reasons I was saying before. Why only 30%? Because obviously embarking on these paths involves a change in entrepreneurial management and production culture, of organizational management of resources and production processes, all the way down to financial management, which involves a radical change in a company's managerial approach. And it is clear that these changes are frightening, in addition to the fact that they are all expensive interventions. And so it is clear that resources, yes, are coming, but the resources we have are not enough for the money needed for some productive innovations. It clearly requires a major commitment from the entrepreneur. Did you wonder if it was seen as a necessity? Therefore, we are now starting a new chapter concerning the theme of relevant regulations. Until a few years ago, sustainability was exclusively an ethical choice of the entrepreneur. It was all about expense and little fame, just inner glory. Today is lucky in some aspects, but there are risks too. It is becoming a norm, the regulations on sustainability, on the conduct of business, on the management of the sustainability report, on the communicative practice of sustainability. Maybe then we will talk about it, are becoming norms that then also have the sanction consequences if you don't comply with certain rules. So, on the one hand, as citizens, as parents, we have to take a good look at the fact that politics and international institutions have realized how sustainability is no longer an ethical choice, but has to become a regulatory direction, because we have to force the community that is made up of politics, institutions, citizens, and businesses to move toward that direction. On the other hand, however, one must be careful, because then, when a decision that is supposed to maintain ethical value is perceived solely as a duty, one risks what? That one does things to comply with laws and not to achieve results. And so you risk, and this is the real risk, that sustainability practices transform into a collection of protocols to be followed, no matter the consequences they entail. The regulations mandate the evaluation of impacts, which undoubtedly assists in mitigating this risk. But we know that made the law has found a deception. We must be careful because small business owners need support to navigate these processes. Because attention, sustainability is not something that only concerns large companies. This is an element that must be stated.
Absolutely, yes. In fact, you touch on a point that I also wanted to ask you. The contrast we can identify between large firms and small producers is that sustainability is a feasible goal for small businesses too, making it realistic for them to strive for it. Alternatively, we might also face concerns regarding the issues we have recently pointed out, including costs and investments that could prove to be quite heavy on our resources, so we might leave behind these small situations that they might want to offer their contribution in this matter, yet they are unable to keep pace with these requests due to various reasons.
There is a risk, and it relies on the laws to adjust the commitments, and the sustainability targets are set according to the size of the businesses and the type they represent. The wine supply chain is very complex and articulated. We start from companies that are exclusively viticulture, to companies that are vertical because they are viticulture process and sell, to companies that are only bottlers because they buy bulk. Now, the standards should be competent, and Italy is putting in place an appropriate legal system to meet this requirement, to ensure that every business figure in the wine sector has defined objectives and sustainable methods in place. There is the S.2 which is the viticultural protocol, which then gives the guidelines. Then there is the expansion that there has been subsequently with the single national standard launched by the ministry, which also extended to other areas, to other processing areas. So more industrial in nature, with parameters and protocols to put everyone in a position to become sustainable. Now, what is the problem? What I was saying before, the challenges of cultural leaps and economic hardships, which however lead to which can also be answered in another way. In the conference we did at CIME, we demonstrated with best practices of companies that sustainability, if it becomes a management model, brings economies of scale, optimizations, which ultimately show up on the balance sheets. That is, it actually brings economies. Everything we invest in human and financial resources in sustainability pathways, we ultimately find them in process optimization, as I mentioned earlier, simply in lower bills. On the flip side, there's an element that certainly still doesn't have a positive reply. But what advantage do I have in the market if I am sustainable?
In fact, what emerges and what we know is that consumers still choose based on price when it comes to the shelf.
Exactly.
That's the way it has been for so many years, and it continues to be that way. A lot of studies have been done evaluating the impact of labels, the impact of docks, the impact of variety, but at the end of the day, we always come down to price. And so another important thing to understand is how do we get the consumer to perceive the value of these sustainable practices? And most importantly, how to make the consumer understand when. So alas, we can talk about greenwashing rather instead of something concrete and real that the company is working for. This matter holds significance as it poses a risk of sending the consumer into a state of confusion, consequently leading to a loss of the meaning that you previously referred to when discussing the term sustainability, and at the same time instead perhaps failing to highlight it properly.
You put together so many themes, so let's start from the theme of small and medium-sized businesses that today have the great difficulty that sustainability is becoming a prerequisite for going to market. It is no longer a competitive element. In a broader sense, it has turned into a crucial element for reaching some markets, I think especially in Northern Europe and America. With a consumer, however, who even in Italy, when interviewed for market surveys, says that he chooses wines only on the basis of sustainability. But as you rightly say, when you're in front of the shelf, in the end, it's the price that matters. That is, if I have to choose between two products of equal price, I will choose the sustainable wine, but if I have to pay 5 cents more for a sustainable wine, I do not agree. So what does that mean? That small businesses, it is not in the market that they can find an answer to investment. As I said before, they can find it a management optimization. But still, let's not delude wine producers. Sustainable wines, the market does not recognize them. In some markets, for example, Scandinavian countries, if you are not sustainable, you don't get in at all. And whatever, but those are realities still. In Canada, they are still realities. Let's say defined important, but defined. In the other markets, sustainability, if you have it, fine. But but don't expect the consumer. So how do you help these small and medium enterprises? The wine account needs help from the cooperative system. We possess various cooperative organizations that have implemented systems to handle all the work in a centralized manner, of monitoring, of education, of practices. And so, in that case, what happens? That you're able to spread on the ground the practice of sustainability to thousands of wine growers because of the cooperative centers that take charge of this issue. What about the enterprises? Consortium. There are very few consortiums yet. I'm thinking of Nobile Montepulciano because, from what I understand, it is the first consortium that has been Equalitas certified that do with respect to businesses the same work. They do all the work. Preparatory and subsequent monitoring. That relieves companies because they already give you addresses. What is the other important element of these collective realities? Sustainability doesn't end at the gates. Sustainability comes first and last because sustainability begins in the vineyard. However, prior to the vineyard, it originates in the nursery that provides you with the young vines. Before anything else, it originates in the machines you purchase for tilling the vineyard, travels through the vineyard, moves into the cellar, and ultimately ends up with the consumer. So it's a path that doesn't end. Therefore, where consortium realities that represent a territory take on the problem, they manage to achieve much more significant, impactful results. The last question you asked me about the consumer topic, that's a very complex subject. Why? Because undoubtedly the consumer knows what something is, knows what sustainability is, Mendier, and it is known that sustainability can be measured, and they also know that it is no longer enough to say you are green, but you have to be able to prove it with metrics, with measurements. The consumer is ready. They are the business owners whose limits I cannot ascertain. They realize the need for caution in communication. Sustainability practices, if they are not rigorously documented and measurable, the consumer knows that, is not willing to pay for it. But you know, as they say, if you claim to be green, you have to show me the carbon footprint going down.
He recognizes the data very well the moment it is provided to him. If this data is missing,
Exactly.
He notices it. And so it is a job that is definitely internal to companies, that clearly of having to provide for sustainability budgets in different aspects. That the consumer also has to be able to recognize this thing, and also you mentioned it earlier rightly, the suppliers. So to this day, even suppliers are required to have certification statements, in short, as much as possible, real information, tangible data that could subsequently guide us to the company's seller, as it is not limited to our area alone, but it is found in other areas. Thus, it is crucial to communicate this information to both the company and the winery, ensuring that they can integrate it and confirm that the supplier they depend on works with this mindset. And thus, the product that is utilized within its wine should accurately reflect what it subsequently conveys to the consumer. This is an important aspect that companies producing goods, including us at Enartis, are definitely focusing on to adjust ourselves as well. The sector's role in addressing the requests that come from our consumer, which is unmistakably the winery. One interesting thing I wanted to ask you on this topic is, how do you see digitization, and then on a level also a little bit with a future thought? Yeah, I say future even though actually digitization is something that is present now. But do you think this point could help wineries and producers in terms of sustainability? Is it possible that it could act as a hindrance and something that weighs even more heavily on their shoulders? So sustainability practices a path to be pursued with all the duties involved, and in parallel also a request to work more and more on digitization issues. Is it really too much to ask of the producers what we are, or is it something that is useful and from which they can later benefit?
So I would first like to quickly take up the topic of supply chains. Why? Because this is a brand new concept that has come to market, let's say, not just for wine generally. It's been a very short time, and it's a topic of great importance. Why? Now, on the one hand, trivially, because the environment is under all of us. It is not that it is under only the wine company, or it is under only Enartis, or it is under only the consumer, and therefore sustainability, as it needs to consider the full lifespan, not just of the product but also of the company's operations. Trivially, you cannot do them alone. You always have to do them together, and the latest legislation, European sustainability, requires companies to choose certain commitments of a sustainable nature. So now this is no longer a choice. It has become an obligation, and I must say it is an obligation that I enjoy likes, because it forces us to work together, and we know how much in Italy, all over the world. In Italy, we are really good at not knowing how to do it or not wanting to do it, but when we do it well. So this issue of supply, that on the one hand, or for example, a winery is like saying it opens up the world of suppliers of dry matter. Here you are also there, you are there, the corks, the bottles, the cartons. That is, this whole world has to speak the same language, because then at the end, I moderated a conference a couple of years ago, where at the end I said to all the suppliers who were at the table, I said, look then, at the end of the day, it's the wine world talking to the consumer. You who make the corks don't talk to the consumer, but if you have a carbon footprint that ultimately burdens the bottle, then it is the wine world that pays. And so you have to be careful about that. And the same thing you have to say with respect to, for example, to a social winery, with respect to winemakers, to a bottler, with respect to those who supply them with the raw material, for it is the bottler who uses their name and therefore has, like, say, the LCA on his bottle of wine. But in that LCA is the whole sustainability commitment of those upstream. And so it's clear that these obligations need to start being catching for everybody, not just for those on the front end of the market. And so now I come to the second question on the topic of digitization. Digitalization has clearly helped sustainability immensely. Just think about what big data management means in the vineyard to regulate watering and pesticides. And what it means, for example, in the last few months, there have come even these new ones with artificial intelligence that has entered inside the winery technologies. What it means to manage remotely automated processes, so much so that even in the newspaper, we sparked the provocation that we are in danger of moving toward the avatar winemaker, in the sense that now these intelligent systems are able to make wine in quotes by themselves. And we asked Professor Gerbi, who is the chairman of the technical committee, I say, excuse me, but then from the human winemaker we are entering into the electronic winemaker, and he said no. However, it's not that he said no, because still there is human programming, yes, but a little bit. However, for your question, the answer is yes. Digitization is a strategic asset because it brings huge savings. We said in the vineyard, I made 2 cases in this other meanwhile, that the winery runs 24 hours a day, no interruptions and everything. So there is no interruption. For example, they were talking to me that some machines, when you turn them off and turn them back on, a significant amount of energy is consumed, and when artificial intelligence is in control, it never gets switched off. And in short, the energy savings and costs are huge, clearly, but we get into a wider world here. So we should understand well how we regulate ourselves with respect to this extraordinary tool that is artificial intelligence, that it doesn't become a monster.
Thank you, Giulio. Yes, I can definitely say that looking a bit into the future, we have an important challenge ahead. So this future is quite daunting from this perspective. And there is a path that is also ambitious. Nonetheless, it seems to me that I grasp, even after this conversation with you, that we possess all the necessary cards and information to fulfill our roles, and therefore have a shared commitment from suppliers, wineries, and the consumer themselves, clearly also with the media. And so from that point of view, I see a positivity in the path that we will have together.
Absolutely, yes, as long as we all do it together.
Thank you, Giulio, for being with us. It was really a pleasure. See you on the next episode of Winemaking Experiences by Enartis.